This time they had him. Hood only had 2 of his men with him, and the sheriff was backed by 10, all on horseback, while the outlaws were on foot. The bloodhounds had lost the scent, but that didn't matter. There was no escape. Hood thought he'd been clever. His trail led to a brook babbling enthusiastically as its waters sped downstream. It was natural to think he'd taken to the water, using it to mask his scent. But he hadn't been quite careful enough. There, on a branch beyond the far bank, a scrap of green cloth fluttered. Another brown thread was caught on a thorn further into the thicket. The Sheriff of Nottingham's horse huffed a relieved breath as he dismounted.
"Through here!"
he shouted.
"They've got less than 5 minutes lead!"
Harnesses jingled as the soldiers tied their horses to the surrounding trees, all but Sir Guy of Gisborne. The wretched man sat on his mount, staring into space as if he hadn't heard a word the sheriff said. The circles under his eyes were as dark as bruises, and his hair was tangled and unwashed.
"Earth to Gisborne!"
the sheriff snapped, clicking his fingers. It took Guy a second to focus. "What?" he said eventually, blinking as if he'd just woken.
"Horse, dismount! Hood, pursue! Understand?"
At the mention of the outlaw's name, the haze cleared from Gisborne's eyes. The light that burned in them was so fierce even the sheriff looked away. Understood. There was a sound up ahead. A muffled footfall. Hood was close. He was close. He was outnumbered. And this time the sheriff would end it. "I'm gonna kill him."
"Yes," the sheriff said. "That's the general idea."
Guy turned to glare at him. "No, I'm gonna kill him." He drew his sword with a metallic rasp. The blade looked dull in the twilight of the forest, but the sheriff knew it was wickedly sharp. He pictured it for a moment, slicing through Robin Hood's neck.
"Go right ahead. Who am I to stand between a man and his unhealthy lust for revenge?"
For a big man, Guy was light on his feet. The outlaw must have had no idea how close death was. There was a frozen moment as Guy raised his sword and held it above his head. Then it thrust out and down, plunging into the bush that hid the outlaw. There was an inhuman yelp that made the sheriff's smile widen. Then there was the sound of a frantic, high-pitched barking, and his smile dropped. Guy swung his sword again. It missed, but the animal was driven from the bush. It was a dog. The sort of mangy cur the peasants took poaching. But someone had dressed it in clothes, a rough brown jerkin and green leggings. It was these clothes they'd seen caught on the bushes, and the dog's shadowy figure that had led them on. It stared at them insolently for a moment longer, barked once, then turned and fled into the woods. Guy let out a yell of frustration that was nearly as inhuman as the dog's bark.
"That scum tricked us!"
"It's black magic," one of the soldiers muttered, crossing himself. "Transforming himself into an animal, cavorting in the forest like a wild thing, laughing at us in the voice of a beast. It's the devil's work. The mark of a witch." The sheriff's head spun round so fast he heard the bones in his neck click.
"What did you say?"
I said it's black magic. Transforming himself into an animal, cavorting.
"Not that bit, you moron! The last thing."
The man cleared his throat nervously. The mark of a witch. The sheriff snapped his fingers.
"That's it! Brilliant!"
"Thank you, my lord. I like to believe I have a unique understanding of the supernatural."
"Oh, not that! That's an unmitigated heap of garbage! But people believe it. Simple, credulous, unwashed cretins such as yourself. Ah! Now."
"Now what, my lord?" Gisborne asked. His pale face was alive with sudden interest. The sheriff pulled on his horse's reins, turning it back towards Nottingham.
"Now, I think I may finally have a way to solve our outlaw problem, for good."
Guy woke the next day to the sound of hooves. His eyes blinked open on daylight and he realised he'd been laying in bed half the morning. It never used to be this way. Before Marion's death, his dreams had been untroubled. Now, all he saw every night was the expression on her face as she died. The accusation in her eyes. It was unbearable. Sometimes he made himself stay awake till sunrise beyond the point of exhaustion. But when he finally succumbed to sleep, the dreams still came. He'd tried every potion the apothecary had to offer and none of them could banish her from his mind. He thought perhaps he didn't want them to, because if she disappeared from his dreams, she'd truly be dead. I am dead. You killed me. His legs tangled in the sheets, and he tumbled to the floor in shock. No, he said, covering his eyes. You're not real. I'm still sleeping. Marion strode towards him, green dress swirling around her legs, the sun falling in shafts through the window, casting an ethereal glow about her pale form. The floral scent of her perfume was soft in the air. You're awake, she said. Look at me, Guy. She was as beautiful as he remembered, but her green dress was stained with blood. You betrayed me, and all for Hood. He's the one who should pay for what he's done. Go and haunt him! Marion smiled sadly as she faded away with the echoes of his shout. But when his voice had died, another, louder noise took its place. Someone was banging on the door. Guy dragged himself to his feet, pulling on his leather breeches and leaving his nightshirt to flap above them. The sheriff had seen him look worse. Except it wasn't the sheriff waiting at the door. Guy had never seen this man before in his life. He wouldn't forget a man like that. He was so tall he had to stoop to fit under the lintel. But there was something awkward about his height. He looked like he spent a lot of time trying to disguise it. Bony ankles goose-pimpled in the cool air above frayed boots. But the eyes, peering over a beaky nose, were an almost silvery grey, sharp and far too knowing. You haven't been sleeping well, the man said. His eyes narrowed. What gives you that idea? The man smiled, calm in the face of Guy's fury. She will forgive you, but first, you must forgive yourself. Guy took a quick, stumbling step back. What? Who are you? I'm Hugh Alvinson, the man said. Witchfinder extraordinary, summoned by the sheriff to rid these woods of the devil who's plaguing them. Nottingham Castle was seething with people. Much eyed them suspiciously as he shuffled his way through the crowd, face hidden beneath a deep hood. Even in Sherwood they'd heard the rumours. Talk about the sheriff's new strategy, the reinforcements he was calling in to help him in his hunt for Robin Hood. It wasn't exactly an unfamiliar story, but these reinforcements were like nothing he'd seen before. Who were these people? Take him, for example, wearing the coat made out of... Were those really weasels? And then there was another one who looked to be sniffing everyone who walked past. What was the sheriff up to? And there was the man himself, pushing past the skinned weasel coat and slapping the next man when he tried to sniff his shoulder. The sheriff mounted the stage to stand behind Gisborne, who slouched against a wooden pillar and scanned the crowd with overbright, almost feverish eyes. Much shrank back further into the shadows as a hush gradually descended over the crowd.
Friends, thank you for coming. You've no idea the pleasure it gives me to see, well, most of you here. You're all, every one of you, experts in your field. There's not a single man here who hasn't burned a good few dozen witches at the stake. You probably think you know how to defeat evil. You may believe You already have, but you are wrong. Here, in Nottingham, in the heart of England, lives an evil more pure, more despicable, more downright infuriating than any demon from the depths of hell. He may wear the guise of a simple man, but Robin Hood is in league with the devil himself.
This, Much thought, didn't sound good. You've got to be kidding, Robin said. Much scowled. His heart was still pounding from the run back to the forest, and he wished that just once Robin would take him at his word. Do I look like a man who's joking? He asked. Robin shrugged. Usually, yes. All right, but this time I'm deadly serious. Witch-finders, Little John said. He turned suddenly, suspicious eyes on Robin. You haven't been consorting with demons lately, have you? I thought I caught a glint of red in your eye by the fire last night. Robin sighed. There's no such thing as witches. If anyone's on first-name terms with the devil, said Tuck, it's the sheriff. Witches might not exist, Much said, but these witch-finders do. There's hundreds of them, well, dozens, and they're all after you. But we're not witches, so they won't be able to find us, John said with that infuriating reason. But they're not looking for witches, Alan said. They're looking for us, right? Who knows what kind of powers they've got? For heaven's sake, Robin said. Witches don't exist, and witch-finders don't have any mysterious powers. So, you're saying we're safe? Much asked dubiously. No, I'm saying the sheriff must have a different plan. Something we haven't realised yet. Guy decided the only safe option was to keep his mouth shut. He turned his gaze to the ground so he wouldn't have to look at the gangly witch-finder walking at his right hand with those terrifyingly knowing eyes, and so he wouldn't have to see Marion, somehow inexplicably walking at his left hand. I won't go away if you ignore me, she said. We've got unfinished business, you and I. Just shut up, he gritted, unable to stop himself glancing up at her. I beg your pardon, Witchfinder Hugh said. Nothing, Guy growled. Just nothing. He couldn't let this man find out he was talking to ghosts. That was the kind of thing witches did, and witches got burned at the stake. So, there are rumours of fell doings in this village, are there? Evil forces, dark sightings, stuff like that? Asked Witchfinder Derek, the fair-haired, good-looking one with an expression that managed to be simultaneously calculating and slightly stupid. He didn't frighten Guy at all. He just irritated him. But the sheriff had picked these two in particular, and his instructions had been very clear. Even in his half-waking haze, Guy knew he'd be wise to obey them. There's talk of a witch, yes. No wonder, when these villagers are said to be so close to the hooded terror himself. Guy shot him another sharp look. How could Hugh know that? He'd only been in Nottingham a day. He darted another more cautious look to his left, where Marion still walked beside him. There was a half-smile on her face, and he thought she was probably enjoying this. That would be just like her, taking pleasure in his discomfort. Are you all right? Derek asked. You're looking a little peaky, if you don't mind me saying. Yes, I do mind, said Guy coldly. They crested a ridge and finally Locksley lay spread out before them, ramshackle but lively. Children played by the stream, brown streaks of mud around their bright white smiles. Their parents watched fondly from a distance. Marion had loved this village. She'd been prepared to die to defend its people. They were worth it, she said. Look at them, Guy. They deserve better than what you're doing. And you know it. Right, Guy snarled, deliberately looking at the witchfinders instead of her. Let's get on with it. When Kate saw Gisborne enter the village beside two of the sheriff's witchfinders, she felt a knot of fear in her stomach. Fear and hatred for the man who had killed her brother, Matthew. His dark eyes swept over her as he scanned the villagers. They seemed to catch and pause a moment before moving on, and she shivered. Gisborne shouted for attention, but when the villagers had gathered, it was one of the witchfinders who stepped forward, the tall, gangly one with the sharp nose and pale eyes.
"There's no need for fear any more. I know that times have been hard here, especially for you, Mistress Perry. Both parents passing away in the space of a month. A terrible loss."
There was a gasp from the villagers. "How do you know that?" Joan Perry asked, voice shaky with unshed tears. The witchfinder lifted her hand and cradled it in his.
"The Lord feels your pain, mistress. He whispers it to me. He tells me all your secrets, the hidden darkness in every soul."
The crowd murmured in wonder as the other witchfinder shot him a sour look. "Exactly," Gisborne said brusquely. But Kate thought he sounded shaken. "And we all know what you lot feel about Robin Hood. You'd do anything to help him. Well, now it's time to pay." The other witchfinder stepped forward, sweeping his blonde hair from his eyes. "Now, I'm sensing an old lady. She passed to the other side. I'm getting an M, or is it a P, or..." He looked around the villagers frantically. "It could be a W." "Auntie Wendy died 10 years ago," Farmer George said dubiously. "Yes, Wendy, that's it. Old lady, was she? Grey hair, not so steady on her feet anymore." "That's right," George said, sounding slightly more impressed. The witchfinder shot a quick, triumphant look at his gangly counterpart. "What's that, Wendy? You want your nephew to know that you're very content on the other side. She says there's no need to fret, George. She's as happy as Larry." "Blimey! Death certainly changed that miserable old bat," somebody shouted from the crowd. The witchfinder scowled, but Gisborne pushed him aside before he could speak. "This is pointless. Listen, you scum. There's a witch here. You know it. I know it. And if one of you doesn't point them out, all of you will suffer." Nobody was foolish enough to think Gisborne was bluffing, but they wouldn't sacrifice an innocent to save themselves. That, Kate thought, was why they were better people than their master, for all that they were commoners, and he was a gentleman. Then, just as Gisborne had opened his mouth to speak again, a small voice piped up. "I know the witch, sir," the little girl said. "I've seen her in the woods, dancing with the devil." Something about the way Gisborne smiled at the child made the knot of fear tighten in Kate's stomach. Gisborne knelt on the ground, bringing his eyes to the child's level. "And did you recognize her?" he asked. "Do you know who the witch is?" There was a moment's hesitation. Then the little girl nodded. "Yes," she said. "It's her." Her finger pointed straight at Kate. The two witchfinders dragged Kate into the centre of the village. Some boy tried to stop them. By the look of him, he was probably another brother. Gisborne flinched at the sudden memory of plunging his sword into a young man. A girl's scream as he fell to the ground. And then it was gone. Guy strode forward, felling the boy with a negligent blow. Marion's spirit walked beside him. She was silent, but he could read the contempt in her face. The witchfinders pushed Kate to her knees in the mud. It splashed across all four of them, stinking of pigs and worse. Only Marion remained untouched, her perfect pale face unmarked. Guy found himself staring at it, and forced his eyes away with an effort of will. "Get on with it!" he shouted at the witch-finders. "Is she a witch or not?" Derek sniffed, offended. It's not as simple as that. There are rituals, prayers, procedures." He trailed off at Guy's glare. "Although there are also some simple tests. Quick tests. Quick and simple tests." Hugh, always faster on the uptake, had already pulled something small and shiny from the purse he carried around his neck. He turned to the crowd holding it out, and Guy saw that it was a long needle.
"Witches think they are cunning,"
Hugh said.
"but they are stupid. They make a bargain, a deal with the devil. Their souls in return for power."
"Look at me," Kate said. "What kind of power have I got?" "Ah," said Derek, "that's the cunning bit. Don't want to be too obvious about it, do you?" Guy shot him a foul look, and he subsided.
"Power over your bodies, over pain and death," said Hugh. "That's what you bought in return for your soul. And that's how you shall be known."
He spun so fast, Guy barely followed the movement. One moment the needle was glittering in sight of the crowd, the next it was buried inches deep in Kate's arm. She stared in shock, but without any sign of pain. Seeing her reaction, the villagers let out a sound that was halfway between a gasp and a groan.
"The mark of a witch,"
Hugh said.
"All the proof we need."
"I was just about to do that," Derek muttered. "Do you confess your sin?" Guy asked Kate. "What do you think?" she said, defiance hiding her fear. "It doesn't matter," he told her. "You'll die either way."
"So, that's it,"
Marion whispered in his ear.
"More blood at the sheriff's orders, and on your hands. I hope you're happy."
Guy bit his lip to stop himself from replying. He wanted to tell her that of course he wasn't happy. How could he ever be happy again, now she was dead? Shadows were already lengthening around the forest as Alan, practically dragging a village boy with him, sprinted into the clearing where Robin stood waiting. The rest of the gang gathered around him. "Well, go on then," Alan urged, as the boy gazed with unbelieving eyes at Robin. "Tell him what you told me." By the time the boy had finished his tale, Robin was frowning worriedly. Next to him, Much tried to adopt a similarly concerned expression, but just looked like he was in pain. "Well, the sheriff sunk to a new low," Much said. "For him, that's quite an achievement." "He's using Kate to get at me," Robin said bitterly. "And she's suffered enough already because of us." "So, we go in and rescue her," John said, hefting his staff. Alan stared at him. "Yeah, because it's not like he'll have the entire guard watching out for us or anything crazy like that. We've taken them on before." "And we've lost people," Robin said. "No." There was a tense silence. He could tell they thought he was talking about Marion. But he wasn't. Not really. There were plenty of other good people lost along the way, victims of the sheriff's malice. "Well, we sneak in then," Much said. "I'm good at that." "Well, what do you think, Robin?" John asked. "Going arrows flying or silent in the dead of night?" "Neither," Tuck said before Robin could reply. "That's exactly what the sheriff is expecting us to do." Much shrugged. "Well, when has that ever stopped us?" "He's right," Robin said. "If we didn't attempt the impossible now and again, we wouldn't be us. Wouldn't be legendary," he said, pointedly to Tuck. "Think about it," Tuck said. "What happens if we do manage to rescue her?" "We feel really good about ourselves," Much suggested. "And who knows, pretty girl like that, overflowing with gratitude, heat of the moment, it could be a very rewarding experience." "But she's a witch," Tuck said. "I thought we didn't believe in witches." "We don't," Robin said, glaring at Tuck. "But the villagers do. And if we rescue one..." Robin nodded. suddenly understanding. Then we must be in league with the forces of darkness. It'll just prove everything the sheriff said about us was true.
Clever old sheriff,
Much said bitterly. So, what are we going to do? John asked. Robin grinned. Be cleverer. The castle was sleeping. All but the night watch, and they had the bleary-eyed look of men who were longing for their beds. Guy longed for his too, but he feared what sleep would bring. Instead, he paced the dark corridors, footsteps echoing hollowly. He thought he was awake, but maybe he was still dreaming. Perhaps he'd never woken from his last nightmare. Perhaps he never would.
Look at it this way, Marion said. If you're still asleep, then you might as well do the right thing. What have you got to lose?
Nothing, he sighed. I've lost it all already.
Losing implies it was an accident. You threw it away.
He spun to face her, no longer caring if anyone might be watching. Threw what away, Marion? Your love? That was never mine to begin with.
Maybe not. But you had my respect, Guy.
Did I? You only thought well of me when I did what you wanted, when I acted like your precious Robin. You never cared for who I really was. I don't think you even knew me. What's that, my lord? A voice said. It was the soldier outside Kate's cell. Guy realized with a start that he'd somehow made his way down to the dungeons. Maybe Marion had meant to lead him here all along. Nothing. You're dismissed. The man hesitated, blunt red face creasing with worry. Go on, man, Guy barked. She's not going to break through solid wood, is she? The soldier nodded reluctantly and turned away. But he kept glancing at Guy over his shoulder as he went. How much of the conversation with Marion had he heard? Did he think Guy had lost his mind? Maybe he had. What was to be gained from talking to this woman? He should walk away. But he leaned his forehead against the prison door to peer in through the narrow bars. A pair of blue eyes stared right back at him. Maybe I can break through solid wood, Kate said. I am a witch, after all. So the witch-finders say. She narrowed her eyes, studying him. But you don't really believe that, do you? We all saw the evidence. She scowled. It didn't suit her. Like Marion, she had a face that was made for smiling. He stole a glance at the spirit beside him, and Marion scowled back, her face a mirror of Kate's. Evidence? Kate scoffed. When he stabbed me with that needle, I didn't feel anything. Because you're a witch. Because it were fake. There was some trick to it. Even if that's true, he said, the child named you a witch. You know that girl was lying, she said. You probably paid her to lie. No, I didn't, he insisted. But he suspected the sheriff had, and he couldn't look Kate in the eye. He felt her staring at him for a long, hard moment. Then he heard her sigh. And when he finally looked up, she'd turned away. I don't know why I'm bothering. If you could murder my brother and kill the woman you love, why on earth would you save me? He slapped the door in a sudden rage. You know nothing about it, he shouted. Nothing!
But I do, Marion whispered. And what has she said that isn't true?
You made me kill you. You left me no choice. Marion smiled at him with that affectionate expression he'd allowed himself to believe was love.
There is always a choice, Guy. You know that. The sheriff chose the witch-finders to arrest her. Haven't you wondered why he picked them in particular?
Because they're the best, he said, not caring that Kate could hear him. They knew things, Marion, about me and the villagers. It was uncanny. They've got powers. You can't deny that. Marion rested a hand against his arm. He looked at her elegant white fingers, but he couldn't feel them. Her touch was as insubstantial as a sigh.
"Oh, Guy," she said, "you always did trust the wrong people."